reward is sufficient to compensate me for making my soul complicit in corruption and greed. I have heard that the reality doesn't correspond to the ideal, but I still think often of the ideal of monastic life. Monastic life means, first of all, to renounce the futile attempt to satiate insatiable desires. And second, monastic life means refusing to work for economic institutions that are engaged in the futile attempt to satiate insatiable desires. Monastic life means being content with what is sufficient to sustain life and not craving more than this. Monastic life means encouraging others to be content with what is sufficient to sustain life and not crave more than this. Now, ideally, I could do both. I could live a monastic life and work to support myself too, but it seems impossible. The economic system is based to its core on the false premise that it is good and right to stoke the fires of greed. Glossy advertisements try to seduce vulnerable minds to seek pleasure from things that are harmful, such as alcohol, and things that are destructive, such as using fuel on tropical vacations, causing more warming on a dying planet, and also things that are immoral, building mansions while neighbors starve and freeze in the cold. The premise of monastic life is that desire should be tamed. The premise of the economic system, on the other hand, is that desire should be inflamed. Why? It's easier to make profits on inflamed desire than tamed desire. Monks are not avid consumers. There is no way to work for this economic system without accepting its false premise that desire should be increased rather than tamed. There is no way to work for this economic system without being complicit in spreading its falsehoods, its lies. By working for a system based on the premise greed is good, I give my consent to this false premise. People sometimes laugh at the idea of monastic life. The economic system has its tentacles so deep in the brains of the population, it becomes impossible to question the axiom that greed is good. The idea that happiness consists in toys and mansions and tropical vacations and trying to satiate insatiable desires, this idea is so firmly implanted in people's brains by the system of greed that it becomes hard to even imagine an alternative. But there is an alternative. The economic system increases its tyranny over the human mind year after year. It perfects the art of cultivating greed and inflaming desire. But there is still a part of your mind that remains unconquered by this tyranny. There is still a part of your mind that can see the futility of trying to satiate insatiable desire. This part of your mind, this glimmer of hope in your mind, is what can lead you on a path away from the tyranny of greed. Hard work is pointless when we work for an economic system that wages endless war and destroys ecosystem after ecosystem in a futile attempt to satiate insatiable desires. An economic system that has elevated greed into a virtue, a system that makes callous, hard-hearted indifference to suffering of the poor and helpless into a second nature axiom in all economic calculations. This depraved system is not worthy of your work. This depraved system of greed is not worthy of your work. Sometimes when I make my pitch for monasticism, people object, if everyone had the monk's scrupulous attitude about work, society could not function. This objection is false. I mean, it's true that if we all had a scrupulous attitude about work, we would refuse to build mansions. We would build homeless shelters instead. We'd refuse to serve gourmet meals to corrupt thieves. We would serve bread to the homeless instead. We would refuse to build bombs for an oppressive regime to terrorize the world. The world would be a far better place if everyone became monks and nuns. The world tries to make you numb and mindless. Why? So you will mindlessly obey a mindless economic system as it mindlessly destroys ecosystems, as it mindlessly creates monuments to vain narcissism and ignores the homeless and helpless. The economic system aims to fulfill demand without ever asking whether demands are wise, humane, merciful, or kind. This is the wrong attitude. This is the wrong system. The only thing a kind, merciful human being can do is to refuse to participate in an unkind, merciless economic system and try to define a life outside it. So what kind of life do monks and nuns live? While the world indulges desire and fans the flames of desire, monks and nuns restrain our desires. There is no sense in fulfilling a desire that will leave you no better off afterward than when you began. You can spend your whole life cranking the crank of sensual desire and end up exactly where you started. This is a pointless life. The life devoted to intellectual improvement, to learning, to seeking wisdom and virtue, this life is a life worth living. Learning proceeds until death. Only then does it stop. A life of intellectual improvement is worth living. A life of chasing pleasure is not. A life of chasing pleasure is pointless. Pleasures will always disappoint you. Why? Because they don't last. Because they never satisfy you. Because they do not improve your mind. They leave you right where you began, cranking the pleasure mill over and over again in a futile attempt to satiate insatiable desire. What kind of life do monks and nuns live? While the world obeys tyrants, we stand aloof. We do not run errands for kings and ministers, or their modern equivalents. While the world seeks entertainment, we seek enlightenment. While the world seeks glitz and glamour, and honor and wealth and praise, we seek simplicity and contentment, and love and kindness and mercy. The world tries to seduce you into chasing pleasure and wealth. Why? Because people chasing pleasure and wealth are easy to control. People who have a mind and use it to think. People who have a conscience and use it to evaluate whether what we are told to do is good and right. People like us are not so easy to control, so the world does not like us. The world has never liked monks and nuns. We tell the world that what the world is doing is pointless. You're trying to satiate insatiable desires, and it's destructive. You're waging war, environmental calamity, all for the sake of vanity. It's pointless.